Well, welcome to this episode of Real Truth Real Quick. I'm Todd Wagner. I am with my friend Gary Hagen, who is president of the International Justice Mission, which is an amazing organization, which I'm glad you're watching this. If you don't know something about it, you're going to learn right here. But Gary, one of the things you do is you fight injustice globally.
Right.
And I think a lot of times people get overwhelmed with worldwide systemic injustices. What can an individual Christian do locally to fight global injustices?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's just to embrace the heart of God for the world. Because I can tend to get very focused on my little world. But of course, John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son." So I think that's the first thing, just opening our heart up to the world and to realize that if Christians are not seen caring for that larger world that God loves, then we're not really accurately representing the heart of God. You know, I was the director of the UN's genocide investigation in Rwanda in 1994, where about 1 million people were slaughtered in just a few weeks' time because the world just didn't pay any attention to that. Well, God was present in the midst of all that suffering. And so it does require for us this sort of opening up our eyes to what's going on in the world, but then not being overwhelmed by it. To then ask, the question we're asking here, what could we actually do, especially locally, that impact global injustice? Well, the first thing is awareness, to raise the alarm that terrible things are happening to people who are hurting. Again, many times our culture is going to turn us to the next piece of entertainment or the next sort of diversion and distraction, which has its place. But for the followers of Jesus Christ, we really should be aware of what's going on in the world and then sounding the alarm. For instance, as we talked about in another episode, there are more people in slavery today than any other time in human history. How many of us would get that right on a quiz? Not a lot, right? So what we can do is begin by raising awareness about these problems and then engaging and using our gifts and capacities to actually make a difference.
I love that. So awareness, sound the alarm, and the scripture says we can't be indifferent to this. All through the scriptures, I think everybody thinks about all the different things that upset God, and justice is always at the top of the list.
Right.
When we ask the question in the Bible, hey, what should we do if we're going to want to please you? I mean, Micah chapter 6, verse 8, it says, do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with the Lord. Isaiah, when he was prophesying to Judah and he was upset with them, he said, learn to do good. And part of the good that I hear you encouraging people is you say, educate yourself about the good that's not out there. So what are some of the best places to go just to even educate yourself? Like how much of America was unaware of what happened in Rwanda in 1994? Where do you go today if you really want to begin to educate yourself about the injustices that are out there globally?
Well, this is specifically why IJM exists. And I would just encourage everyone to go to our website, ijm.org, because that is meant specifically as a way that earnest Christians become very aware of very specific kinds of injustices that are taking place, but also what it is that they can do about it, how they can actually join with local teams of volunteers in their own community. So IJM has volunteer teams that raise awareness, raise resources, raise their voices, because a lot of this also operates in the world of public policy and what it is that governments think the voters care about. Right now, slavery, for instance, there's a lot of interest in establishing that the United States as a leader in the fight against slavery in the world. Well, we're not going to do that if Americans back home don't think it's actually worthy of taking a stand against. So by joining a local team of volunteers, you can raise awareness, raise resources, raise your voice, and also pray together to actually find encouragement and the kind of persevering strength, not for the sprint, but for the marathon work of justice. And we find that in community together. So I would encourage people, go to IJM.org, learn about these problems, but also join a local community group through IJM that can actually get you involved.
I heard it was so great, as your name implies, you're international. So people who watch this overseas, and there's many, in their towns, there's IJM networks all across the world.
Correct.
And one of the things that you need to do, you said to me, I think, that this is the first time in human history, for instance, that slavery is outlawed in every country in the world.
Correct. There's an opportunity now to actually get rid of slavery for good. But we don't want to miss that opportunity and let it go to another generation. Let's seize the opportunity now.
So in your country where you can just say, hey, these are the laws that are on the book, when you find out about an injustice, raise your hand, speak up. about it, okay? And I would say that one of the things that they can do is they can care about the widow and the orphan and the vulnerable in their
Yes.
communities. Because we know that kids, for instance, that don't come from intact homes are more prone to be abused, more prone to be put into oppressive situations like slavery and sex trafficking.
This is what we always find is that the bullies prey upon those who seem vulnerable. And so those who are vulnerable in your community, for whatever those reasons are, they are going to be the ones vulnerable to violence and injustice and abuse. And so those are the ones that we should be finding in our community and stepping up with the love of God.
That's at the very center of everything that Christ was about when he was here. He said, hey, you saw that I was hungry and you didn't feed me. You saw that I was not clothed and you didn't give me clothes. Or you would say, you saw that I was vulnerable and you didn't care because you were comfortable. So,
And he rebuked the religious leaders actually because he said, you're neglecting the weightier matters of the law. And he names those three things from Micah: justice, mercy, and faith. So the first thing on the short list of three is justice. So we know it's at the center of God's heart.
there we go. So there's so much you can do. Sometimes we think we've got to actually change the world. If you change the life of a child's world, that is a world problem to that child. You can love one person, right? There's an old story. I'll just close with this. You know, about a guy that was walking down the beach. He looked way down at the end of the beach. He saw a guy stand up and bend over and stand up and bend over. And he got closer and closer and closer to him. And in fact, the beach was covered with thousands of starfish. I know you've heard this story. And the guy goes, what are you doing? You can't save all these starfish. You can't make a difference.
Yeah.
And the guy picked up a starfish. He whistled in the ocean. He said, it made a difference to that one.
Right.
And so one of the things that you can do is you can love the people you're near, speak about injustice. I loved your comments on awareness, and then certainly be fervent in prayer. But boy, get busy, right? There's a lot you can do locally to fight global injustice. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Real Truth Real Quick. Watch the other ones we linked. The one about, is human slavery still a problem today? It is. And there's so much you can do about it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.